Hi there, and welcome to White Lotus of Light. And this is part of the interview series. And today I am interviewing Adam Sanchez of Raw Yoga. Is that right, Adam? Did I get that right? Raw
Almost
Life
raw
Yoga.
yoga.
Raw Life Yoga. That's right. My apologies, Adam. Um, Adam Sanchez with Raw Life Yoga, and I am starting an interview series now on this channel, and this is the inaugural episode. And the reason I invited the illustrious Adam Sanchez is because not only is he a brilliant astrologer and just an amazing all-around human being, but we met probably a few months ago on Facebook with the whole lockdown. Everybody you meet is in the digital realm nowadays. And he and I talked back and forth quite a bit about various astrology things. Adam is specializes in Western tropical zodiac astrology, and I tend to have my focus on Vedic astrology. So we were just comparing notes using the two different systems, and we were really kind of having some really great back and forth. And so one day Adam was kind enough to invite me to an astrology roundtable with Laura Eisenhower. And we did an astrology roundtable, and it was fantastic. The chemistry was popping. Adam was just really just bringing through just great stuff. And that then led to a retreat that both Adam and I were at this past weekend. The let's see if I remember the title correctly. Navigating the Age of Aquarius with an Awakened Heart. Is that right? No? Am I getting it? Go, Adam. Adam's better with the remembering specifics.
Not actually, but today, okay. Redreaming the World in the Age of Aquarius.
Redreaming the World in the Age of Aquarius. Sorry, Sasha. It's the other one of the other members of the roundtable that Adam and I were involved in. Is it Sasha Bendetti?
Benedetti, yeah.
Benedetti. Wow. Okay. Well, maybe that. I think I got all my stumbles out of the way, folks. And so now from here on out, it's just going to be smooth sailing. So, anyway, Sasha was kind enough to invite Adam and I to the Redreaming the World in the Age of Aquarius retreat, and we both had a presentation. Mine was on the Hindu Yuga system and the end of the Kali Yuga. And Adam, do you want to talk a bit about yours and maybe introduce yourself a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ian, for having me here at the series today, and inaugural interview. I mean, what an honor. Yeah, it's been a really great connection you and I have been fostering, and I love collaborating with other astrologers because, I've had clients come to me who worked with my friends and colleagues, and they say, well, I want to get your perspective. And that's one of the things I love about astrology is there's always a unique perspective every astrologer is going to bring. And so you can always learn from every astrologer if you're open and willing to, So I'm so happy to be able to do that with you and the collaborations that we're doing. Just a little bit about me. I've been teaching yoga for the past almost 11 years now. I got my yoga teacher training certification with Yoga Works in New York City in August of 2010. Shortly after I became, it's been a great ride for sure. I was practicing yoga for many years before that. I started, maybe dabbling when I was about 15 years old. So it's been, over 20 years of practice and things like that. But once I decided to do it professionally, it really became a huge part of my life and not something that I was just dabbling in anymore. Mm-hmm. And shortly after, I became a certified personal trainer, and I was very happy to have that as a supplementary understanding of the human body and how it works, and anatomy, physiology. I was pre-med in college, so I loved all that stuff. I live to understand the body and how it works. And, as I started moving more into the spiritual, it's like, oh, there's also spiritual anatomy and energetic anatomy and all these different layers of our beingness that, we can understand and utilize and even master if we have the proper awareness. So that's been a lot of the work that I've been dedicating myself to. I also do alkaline healing through diet and nutrition because, I had my own health challenges for many years, and I don't necessarily want to go into that for today because we're focusing on the astrology. But needless to say, some really chronic and even, what's the word that they say, terminal, but that it wasn't terminal because of these principles of alkalinity and how it can heal and reverse almost every disease that we know. Wow. So I always recommend people to check into that. Yeah, it's very powerful, just how our relationship to food really is our relationship to health. And, Hippocrates knew that, right? Hippocrates was one of the ancient Hellenistic Western astrologers who, said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. He was actually the founder of modern medicine, right? And he was also, he said, a physician who does not know astrology has no right to call themselves a physician. So,
Wow.
Later in these years, I started doing astrology just after I got my yoga teacher training. I started studying it more in depth. I got my natal chart reading done and I was hooked. I was like, okay, wow, there's really power and potency here that I want to continue to delve deep into and understand and study. And so I started studying it around then, 2011, 2012. And then it was in 2017, almost 4 years ago, to be 4 years ago this August, when I decided to become a professional astrologer. After all the years of study, I felt capable of providing that service. I mean, I was already doing it anyway. I was like, oh, let me read your chart. Oh, let me, because I loved it so much.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, I have enough proficiency here where I feel confident to offer this for people professionally. And it's just, I love it so much. It's so powerful and profound, and it has illuminated my life path in so many ways. I can't even do it justice with words, but that's why I do it justice with what I do with my work, to show people, how it works and how it can benefit them.
That's awesome, Adam. I'll have to have you back. Just quick question, and I don't want to derail our astrology today, but I would love to have you back to talk about your healing journey, actually. And are you talking about like the Dr. Sebi kind of alkalinity? Was that who was the main sort of pathway, or was it something related to Dr. Sebi? I'm just curious.
It's totally related to Dr. Sebi, actually. And that's the cool thing about truth, right? Is once you discover it, you find it everywhere. So
Yeah.
He didn't come actually until later in my process, after I had already discovered, or, the universe presented to me the realities of an alkaline diet. Three things were happening. I was having a lot of orange juice and sugary things for breakfast at that time in my life. I was getting a lot of acid reflux, and I noticed it. I didn't know what it meant, but I noticed it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then shortly after, maybe like a month later, I had a session with an acupuncturist. And based on what he saw on my tongue, he said that my blood was acidic. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. The very same day, I went on a date with someone who was on an alkaline diet. And I was like, okay, universe, I'm listening. It's time to pay attention to this. And so then I started to apply the principles in my life. The tricky part was, one of the big core issues of many of the health issues, if not almost all of them. I mean, of course, there's psycho-spiritual, emotional components to it too. A big, huge component of that on the physical level was a sugar addiction that I had for pretty much my whole life. And so once I found out about the principles of alkalinity, I was like, oh, okay, I have to get off sugar. That was actually the biggest challenge, to just, break that sugar addiction and slowly wean myself off. But the more I did, the healthier and better my body got, and the more it was able to heal. So, but then after doing that, off and on for a couple of years, and I was not necessarily always that easy too, because at that time, I had just left New York. I just uprooted my life. I just started my new career as a yoga teacher and moved to Colorado and to start my life out. And so I was starting from scratch, and, finances being what they are, vegetables are expensive and carbs and sugars are really cheap. So, keeping up with the diet wasn't always, something available. But the more I've done it, the more I see. And then it was a couple of years later, actually, where I discovered Dr. Sebi's work, and I was deeply impressed. So much so, actually, that he inspired me to start a food business. It's called Plant Pizza, and it's a vegan, gluten-free pizza line that basically is, inspired by his recipe. I changed it a whole bunch, and it's not as pure as he would probably have it, but people can't even do the pure doctor. It's a hardcore diet, Dr. Sebi's diet. It's very restrictive.
Yeah. Well, wow, fantastic. I will have to have you back to kind of delve more deeply into your healing journey. That sounds really interesting and could be, I think, really helpful for a lot of folks. That said, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I'd be honored.
Oh, yeah, that would be wonderful. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about today, and I can kind of segue from what you're talking about there, is what you just described for me as a real journey of learning self-love and self-care, and moving away from either mindless consumption or a lot of folks who will start to move in the direction that looks on the surface like self-care will be really toned and fit and look good, but it's coming from a place of ego, and it's coming from a place of kind of a narcissistic outlook, which that's not actually self-love. That's self-aggrandizement, or sort of enshrining yourself on your own pedestal. And the reason I bring up narcissism is because, of course, your book is all about the way that egoic structure has been used in a lot of ways to hijack society. Would you say that's accurate? And you want to say the title of your book, lest I butcher it? I'm pretty sure I know it, but I'll let you say it.
It's a mouthful, so I wouldn't want to torture you. But yeah, you just you nailed the description very well. So I'd say you described it accurately. So the book title is called "Ascending the Narcissism Through Sovereignty: How True Self-Love Heals Human Hatred." And it's an astrological journey. So there is context of the zodiac and how this understanding.
That's awesome. Did you want to just give a little teaser about some of the concepts in your book? I mean, you can see from that title, which is just really expansive, that you've really honed in on what I think is kind of like the core wound in a lot of ways in the West, around people having been tricked into thinking that narcissism is loving oneself, you know, and that, you know, treat yourself, buy that extra whatever for yourself kind of thing. Yeah,
I remember that was a popularized phrase in pop culture for a while. Treat yourself, right? And there's some value to that, don't get me wrong, but if that's soul fixation, you know, only on a material level, then we start to have problems, because you know, the material isn't separate from the spiritual. Actually, when you're from operating from a higher vantage point of spirituality, you can see the interconnectedness. But when you're operating within materialism, you may not necessarily make that same connection about that being a part of spirituality, right? And that's where a lot of people I see can get stuck. And that is where I would say that the systems of this world have encouraged, to say the least, you know, this kind of behavior, because it's actually really disempowering behavior. What it does is it separates us from our true self and our source, you know, the spiritual source that understands that we're more than just material, you know, where we're eternal beings and we don't have to fear about survival or life or death or looking good or, you know, being perfect or all these things. But the world has not really been operating from that understanding for a long time, let's say too long, you know. And so a lot of people do have this sort of reversal of the principle, or a deep misunderstanding of what that means. And so that's part of why I chose the title as carefully as I could. I mean, I could be a little bit verbose sometimes, so I know it's a long title, but I'm happy with it because it fits the description of what I think the message is and the importance of that message, which is to say, narcissism and the self-love that represents, as far as I can tell, is the false self. That is not the true self. Why? Because we, as divine beings, when we are in touch with that inner source, we don't feel the same level, or at least at the very least in my experience, but I've seen this with my clients and you know, loved ones and other people. Don't feel that same sense of angst, or you know, externalization, or seeking external approval, or you know, hyper focus on materialized reality, right? It's like when we understand part of some higher source and some greater vibration of love, we don't need the love from the outside. And that's where the title about true self-love, healing human hatred, being the key, because all that narcissistic self-love, it's not really self-love. Like you said, it's self-aggrandizement, which is one of the cornerstones of narcissism, right?
Yes.
Which, interestingly enough, you know, for people who go into the psychology of it and how it actually works, it's a compensatory mechanism. People only do that when they're secure. People who are actually secure don't feel the need to aggrandize themselves, least of all at the expense of other people, right? So to actually have self-love, to actually get into a space where we know, honor, and respect and love ourselves, that's where the narcissism starts to dissipate, because it's no longer an unconscious operating system, basically, that continually seeks that, you know, fix or supply, as we might call it, from the external. Once we start to actually understand that love is sourced within, then narcissism loses its power or its allure, and people start to, instead of feeling the hyper focus on the outside, they're like, oh wait, all that love that I seek, it's within me. I don't need it from anybody else. I don't need anyone else's approval. I don't need anyone else's praise. And that's not to say that we can't appreciate those things in life, but there's a difference between receiving them and craving them, right?
Right. And that's sort of seeking them at at whatever cost almost. And what's an interesting to me corollary to what you're describing is the narcissist in many ways, I think it would be safe to say, represents the thrust of modern post-enlightenment civilization in a lot of ways worldwide. Obviously the epicenter of that being so-called Western culture out of Europe and the United States. But it's certainly it's certainly spread. That system has spread worldwide and has taken on kind of a slightly different guise depending on the culture that it's penetrated. But that same system, which is, you know, very linked to I don't even like to use the word capitalism since it's not even capitalism really, but this crony capitalist global financial system kind of goes hand in hand with that. And what's interesting is that you're describing a false self-love, so a false taking care of oneself, right? And what we're shifting to as this, you know, and I won't get too into it, but it's going to be a common thread in many of my interviews, but this great reset movement coming out of the world's wealthiest people out of Davos, they're now moving away from fake self-love towards fake love for community, fake love for the other by denial of the self again, and even also denial of the community at depth. It's always a very surface image driven, you know, like, oh, I care about people because I put a black square up on Facebook, right? Rather than actually taking the time to get educated, talk to people who are in whatever group you're trying to help, and find already on the ground grassroots activists, not well-funded, you know, media darlings, but actual true grassroots that aren't getting funded by whatever shady billionaire or whatever political organization, but the people have been doing the work for decades. And so we're moving away from this false serving of the self to this false serving of the community. And both systems actually just serve this tiny elite at the top. And they're going, oh, that old system of the narcissist system, as you would call it, right? They would call it something else. Oh, we're now moving away from that because we're moving towards a total denial of the self, and that's got to be better, right? Deny your humanity, deny who you are, deny that there's any fiber or connection to community other than financial or actual force. So it's interesting because you're talking about a real movement towards true self-love, and I would also like to see a movement that I believe will come from what you're describing. That's true love for the community, true love for the culture, true love for the people, true love for our fellow human beings, regardless of their skin color or orientation or gender or what have you. And it's almost like the elite sense that there's a movement towards what you're talking about, that people are so disgusted and done with that fake image system that they're starting to move within. And so quick, how can we short circuit that? People are worried and starting to care about other people and wondering how they can help society. How can we channel that energy in a direction we want as social engineers? So it's interesting how there's both claim to be one thing, and they're actually both a hollow fake version of what they say. So I just think that that's an interesting sort of corollary to what you're describing. Sounds fantastic. Did you want to mention a little more about your book before we shift to the solar return chart, or
no, but
what I said?
To what you just said, I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, I love your gifts with words. You have a way with words, and
Oh, thank you, brother.
yeah, I also love the way that you look at things and the way that you can see these sort of nuances that might be missed by some, or the case with the superficiality of the movements of social engineering that they're encouraging, and it makes me think a little bit of the talk that Emily Trinkus gave at this retreat that we just had for this weekend, where she's talking about the polarity between Leo and Aquarius, right? Which very much within this conversation, in this context. And so she talked about the significance of understanding polarity as a unity, that the pole itself is one thing. There's two sides to the pole is one thing. So in that sense, Aquarius and Leo are one thing. So there's something said about our own individual sovereign Leo energy and our individualistic, but part of a greater whole community Aquarian energy, right? And how these things very deeply interact with one another, and how there can even still be a kind of narcissism from the concept or context of community, right? And so, for example, what are some of the traits of narcissism? Abusive language, gaslighting, not listening, no communication, right? We see a lot of that going on these days with people basically just repeating what they're told about to be healthy, you have to wear a mask, you have to get the shot, when there's not even any logic to it, but there's not even an ability to have a conversation about the logic or no logic or anything about it at all, right? Because it is coming from a somewhat of a narcissistic place, which is there's no communication, there's just almost like a program running the show.
Yes.
And that's a big part of even this communal energy. It can still be narcissistic. In fact, it is still narcissistic. So right. Even though it's under the guise of being not narcissistic at all. And here's the reason why: because there is no actual connection between the person who's operating from that place and their environment and their outside world, right? They're just doing what they think that everyone else should be doing. So that's their concept of being in relationship, but it's not actually related to reality or the other person or people or community, right? So there's so much deception that goes within it. But one other last point I wanted to mention about this dynamic and this polarity of the astrology, because it's been coming to me in the past few days. Being yourself is the most revolutionary act of our times.
Wow. Well, viva la revolution, brother.
Absolutely. I mean, just because, they're taking the shadow Aquarian energy and trying to manipulate us into that of like some sort of hive mind Borg, where there's no individuality, right? Which is the total version, versus the higher self version of Aquarius, which is fully self-expressed, fully individualistic, fully, in touch with the inner genius and interconnected and interacting with the community at large. Wow,
Adam. Thank you. That was awesome. And just like, wow, you touched on so much. And I'm sad we only have an hour today, because there's a bunch of rabbit holes there that I was like, I'm going down that one. And I'm like, but if I go down that one, like, I'm going to derail this entire thing. That's just amazing. We'll have to have another show just to talk about the kind of big pictures dynamic and talk a bit more about your book, which is talking about these really big movements. And I know you, like I, see all of this in a paradigm of the spiritual evolution of humanity. Someone I would love to get on my show someday is there's a psychic medium named Gigi Young. I'm not sure if you know who she is. Yeah, she did a show recently on one of my favorite YouTube channels, Dark Journalist, with Daniel List, and he interviewed her, and they talked about how, and this is something we can discuss further, and I'll just have this as a teaser. This is going to be a theme over my interviews with various folks, how there's almost, and perhaps may literally be, a bifurcation between those of us who are doing what you're saying. We're following the natural, the like integrated light evolutionary path that's offered by the Aquarian energies, as opposed to like high tech, hive mind Borg, fourth industrial revolution, Davos, Great Reset, transhumanist nightmare. I mean, transhumanism for me is kind of like the best way to describe it. And for those who don't know, transhumanism is not related to transgender. It means people moving beyond being human through like cybernetic implants, things like Elon Musk's Neuralink brain chip. His wife or girlfriend or whatever she is, baby mama Grimes, is saying she's going to line up and get one. And so is little Uzi Vert, who I guess is some rapper of some kind or whatever, is a friend of hers. And so that entire transhumanist movement towards that, I love the way you put it, that shadow Aquarian energy. It's so true, because it's using the beauty of the technological prowess and genius of Aquarius as a way of entrapping humanity. And Gigi Young talks about how that track leads to humans becoming something other than human. And the track that we're on, and that those of us who are following the more natural evolution and trying to really get in touch with our higher selves and the higher energies of Aquarius, are on a path towards becoming something like an ascended master. humanity fully spiritually realized, rather than humanity where intellect and technology is favored over our very essence of what we are as human beings. And so I'm definitely going to have you back. We'll hit some of these concepts more, but yeah, that speaking of the spiritual journey of humanity, like, let me, tell me what you think, and I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the screen here. Tell me your thoughts on this. This is the solar return chart for here for March 20th, 2021, Saturday at 5:38 a.m. Miami, Florida time. I assume you use that time because it's basically dawn on the 20th of March where you live. And I went ahead and used that for my comparative chart.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So yeah, no, it's because of the degree of the sun, right, the moment that the sun had entered into 0 degrees 0 minutes of Aries.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, do you want to talk a little bit about some of your thoughts about what you're seeing here? I mean,
Absolutely.
This is a very packed chart. There's a lot of emphasis here in Aries, like quite a bit of energy there. But go ahead, take it away, brother.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there's a few elements that I saw, when I looked into this chart, and I wrote a report about it as well. I don't remember exactly the title, but it was Aquarian Starseed Collective Showdown. Oh, and the Equinox Rebirth and Aquarian Starseed Collective Showdown, because we are in this age of awakening to these higher vibrational dimensional situations. I mean, for people who may not have heard the term starseed, there's this concept that evolved or advanced evolved souls came into this dimension and incarnated here to uplift and support the evolution of the planet. And I wasn't even sure when I first heard about this 10 years ago. I mean, it certainly resonated, but how do you know certain things, right, when you hear them, if it's true? After 10 years of hearing this narrative and having my own spiritual evolution, I feel more convinced than ever that it is real, and that is what is sort of distinguishing people who are aware of the machinations and manipulations that are going on versus maybe the people who aren't, right? So we're seeing, sort of like you said, a bifurcation of different levels of consciousness, and I think that has a lot to do with soul evolutionary levels of development. And so we'll talk about that a little bit in this chart here, because I do see it. But one of the things that I noticed first and foremost was the first house placements, and how we have Mercury and Pallas Athena in the first house, opposite Vesta retrograde in the 7th house. So Vesta is about cause that we believe in, that we really commit ourselves to and dedicate ourselves to, and that's in the house of relationships. So it's indicating to me that there is a resurgence or a rebirth, if you will, of the commitment levels that we want to bring to our relationships, or we're feeling like, okay, I really want to build something in my relationships, but because Vesta is retrograde, there may also be some hesitations about exactly what that is or who that is, or we may not be clear yet, but we're under the process of reevaluating those things, as we often do with retrogrades. And that is pretty much the opposite Mercury, right? We have a 4-degree difference in that opposition, but it's close enough that it's really consider weighing the pros and cons in our mind. Now with Mercury and Pisces, things might not be the clearest, but very imaginative and very idealistic. And so there's an dream in, like redreaming, the world with regards to our sense of self, as Mercury in the first house, Neptune and Pallas Athena in the first house would have us do, but then also have it be something that links up with our relationships in a way where we can find the harmony, find the compromise, and move on to those next levels where we're dreaming the dream into reality. The second house, we have Venus, the Sun, Chiron, and Ceres all there in the second house of finances and resources, right? Taurus is the second sign, rules, and we have the money. We were talking about this the other day, and you mentioned a really excellent point. When I first saw this, I saw the opportunity and the energetic potential to really start to connect more with our own resources, start to pioneer those resources, maybe the ones that we've already had that we overlooked, or ones that we didn't even know were there, especially since Venus is still in Pisces there in the second house. It suggests to me maybe a little bit, again, of fogginess, but that can also be dreamy too. So it's like it could go either way. But there, Chiron's presence there also indicates healing.
Yeah.
Wounds, our values and our resources. And then Ceres, the one right next to Chiron at 10 degrees of Aries, she's the goddess of the harvest, sometimes called
Yeah.
Demeter, right? So
Right.
there's a nurturance there. Ceres represents how we experience nurturance in our lives. So with her in the second house, it indicates, I'd say some good things. Her proximity to Chiron, again, indicates that there's some wounds that will likely be healing. But because she's there, that indicates to me that there will be an overall positive net result of that healing of the wounds. And the point that you mentioned that I'd love to say here is, how so much of this is showing up inside of the economic, situation that we find ourselves in across the world with the shutdowns and, just the absurdity of it all. So it's I feel it that it's challenging us, as well as you might even say inspiring us to find another way to work around so that we are still meeting our needs. And there is a crisis and an opportunity there that's giving us, the skills, at least, if not the wherewithal, to overcome those challenges.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. I think that's a beautiful interpretation of that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I know you wanted to share, I could say a little more about the 12th house, or we could go into the Vedic one.
You know what? Let's talk about that, because I'm going to talk about the 12th house as well from a Vedic perspective. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, great. Yeah, so one of the things I wrote about in the article was, first of all, Aquarius is on the horizon, so that's pretty huge. More Aquarian energy, as if we didn't have enough over the next 4 decades, right? But not necessarily a bad thing, especially with Jupiter's proximity there, 3 degrees away from the rising. Jupiter is the planet of expansion and blessings and freedom, so there's a nice affinity happening there. However, Jupiter is still in the 12th house, right, ruled by Pisces, and so there can be some lack of clarity, or maybe even confusion, or unseen forces that are working behind the show that we might not be totally in touch with yet. And it's good to keep an eye out. Now, when we look at the other 2 planets that are also there, Saturn at 10 degrees of Aquarius, and then Pluto at 26 degrees of Capricorn, that's some heavy hitting stuff. I personally have Pluto and Saturn in my 12th house, so I know, that's not a light order by any means. And with Jupiter there, I would say it's a bit of a mixed bag, because Jupiter brings more to whatever it interacts with, but it also does bring that blessing and freedom energy. So, I think that it is a mixed bag. There's both good news and bad news within that. The good news being, the higher level of consciousness and awareness that we're going to bring through this process of unearthing the unconscious, or the shadows from the unseen realms of ourself. But then with Pluto and Jupiter all in there, it indicates to me some really deep level shadow work. And also, you might say karma with Saturn, but certainly duty and responsibility and hard work to overcome these old patterns and dynamics from the shadow self that wants to hold on, but it's really our greatest block to those ascension energies that we've talked about. Those universal love energies are available to all of us everywhere now. However, the biggest issue is most of us are not ready and able to receive them fully now. And that's where the shadow work really is in the world.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I'm wanting to talk more about shadow work at the close of the show, just because it is critical. It's always been important. But I think everyone knows deep down, or maybe even not so deep down, that this is a pivotal moment in human history. What it seems to me that this time is about in many ways is kind of sorting out those souls who are ready to take the next step in evolution as humans, versus those souls who need to learn deeper lessons about the shadow side by really immersing themselves, really, going full bore into that. And so, when we close the show, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We are getting a little tight on time. So that was very well said, Adam. I love your interpretation on that. I'm going to switch gears here and real quick switch over to the Vedic chart and then launch into it, if you don't mind, good sire.
Oh, I'm very excited. Tell me more, because this is what I get to learn.
So I want to say real quick for everyone watching that I have studied Western astrology since 1997. So 24 years now, almost 25 years. And so I haven't immersed myself in it as much since I discovered Vedic astrology, because it just kind of resonated with me. I think I've had past lives, many, in fact, in India. And so the entire system of the cosmology just really resonates with me. And what I want to see is that I think there's tremendous value in both systems. And, some people are going to try and say, oh, well, like Bill Nye, the science guy, who's as much a scientist as you or I, by the way, Adam, no degree whatsoever in science. He likes to say, oh, well, astrology is not real because, like, I don't know what a sign is and I don't care, but I'll just pretend he's me. I'm an Aries, but actually the sun doesn't rise on the 31st of March. It no longer rises on the ecliptic in Aries. It's actually in Pisces. So throw out all of astrology. No, this system of tropical zodiac, which uses the skies as they were, some few centuries ago, and therefore there's the discrepancy between sidereal and tropical zodiac. The system works within itself. There's tremendous depth. There's been amazing work done within its own system. And likewise, Vedic astrology is incredible within its own system. And so they both have value. They both give you a different lens and a different feel on what this period of time is on Earth and how those energies work. And Western astrology, tropical zodiac astrology, one of the things I like about it is there's been all kinds of innovations and discoveries, especially like you were talking about some of the major asteroid series and especially Chiron. I can tell you I have zero doubt of the reality of Chiron's impact on us. Just as an example, and anyone who's studied astrology and studied Chiron in particular, you might be able to dismiss some of the other asteroids' influence. You cannot dismiss Chiron if you are even remotely objectively honest as an astrologer. But Chiron's not considered in Vedic astrology. So does that mean that therefore it's wrong? No. Two different systems, they both have value. And I just want to say that because people are going to go, wait a minute, that's not what Adam just said. And that's because of the precession of the equinoxes, over time the skies have shifted. And sidereal astrology, which Vedic astrology uses the sidereal zodiac, it accounts for that precession of the equinoxes, and therefore signs shift. And that doesn't make what Adam just said wrong and me right, and it doesn't make what I'm saying wrong and Adam right. They're both excellent lenses on which to view reality and the soul's journey within their own system. And so I just want to say that for folks who are watching this who maybe aren't familiar with that difference, because might throw them for a loop what I'm about to say, the differences in houses and so forth and signs. So in Vedic astrology, we have Mercury on the ascendant. So I use exact same time, 5:38 a.m. Oh, it did Miami, Arizona. Whoops. Of course it did. Why would there be I didn't even know there was a Miami.
I didn't know there was more than that.
That's hilarious. So let's see, this shouldn't shift things too much. So it shifts things a little bit. It doesn't change my analysis too much because I was going to do it on the fly anyway. But it's interesting because what that does then is it moves the ascendant there into what would be sidereal Capricorn rather than Aquarius. And it puts Jupiter and Saturn. So kind of the emphasis is on this Jupiter-Saturn struggle. That's continuing to happen. Jupiter is a very expansive in nature. It's very kind of an uplifting spirituality where you gain through knowledge or experience. And Saturn is much more of a restrictive spiritual force. You learn your spiritual lessons by being restricted, by being hemmed in, by experiencing loss. And you could also argue that the Great Awakening, those of us who are kind of moving towards the enlightened, ascended master path of spiritual evolution, are following a Jupiter path. And those who are going along with the Davos agenda, the Great Reset, the moving towards technology and worship of the image, that narcissism, as you like to call it, that's that more Saturnian energy. So it's interesting to me that this points to me to once again, kind of the main driver of this period of time is going to be that struggle. And it's within the realm of Capricorn, making it in the realm of government and authority. And of course, we see worldwide that there's a huge struggle between the desire of people to grow and live free and freedom and liberty, and the restrictions being brought along by the global response to boy, I hate to even trigger these algorithms, but the big thing that's causing all the lockdowns and whatnot, we all know what it's talking about. I'm avoiding certain words so the algorithm doesn't hose us. And so then in the second house, we have Mercury, which is, it's interesting to me because that means that this to me says get ready for a lot more Zoom meetings this year. If you want to make any money, it's going to be through technology. It's going to be through communication. It's going to be very difficult, likely because lockdowns will continue again. If we're looking here, the big struggle right now in our sense of self and who we are as a species, who we are, is the struggle between Jupiter and Saturn that's been ongoing and really kicked off in a lot of ways during the Great Conjunction back there in December. But then as we move up to the third house, you see an exalted Venus in Pisces, along with the Sun in Pisces. And the Sun here is the 8th Lord. So that's hidden influences, occult, esoteric. And then Venus is the 5th Lord and 5th and 10th Lord. So for me, seeing that, I see that there's real opportunity to bring in, for those of us who are more in touch with our higher selves, we're going to see an influx of past life karma. Puva Purnya is what it's called in Sanskrit. That's the 5th Lord Venus exalted. Also, we're going to get a tremendous amount of joy and opportunity to expand based on children if we have children. And if you're having children this year, they're going to be very special, very spiritual, and they're going to really uplift and help you in a lot of ways. And in fact, there's quite an emphasis on children because you move over the next house that's really quite stacked is Mars is a Taurus, and it has Mars, Moon, and Rahu, the North Node, all in the 5th house of children. So this is interesting to me. And I think one of the things that this points to, and we're going to see a lot of struggles over, and we're going to see emotional struggles that involve anger, is going to be based on things to do with children and children's education and how things like the ongoing global crisis that we are facing, how it's impacting children. Now that the election is out of the way, some of these more personal influences and energies are going to really come to the fore. And I think that for parents and also society-wide, we're going to start really looking at how is all this impacting children? What does that mean? And I think there's going to be a lot of fighting over that. I have some darker thoughts on what this can mean, but I'm not even going to speak those into existence. But it's a little bit concerning given some of the things that are going on in the background politically. One thing that is very interesting is it puts Moon in the Rohini Nakshatra, which is right next to Orion's belt. The Nakshatra is the lunar mansion. And so Orion's, it's a constellation that's right next to Orion. That's interesting to me because the Orion's belt, which is what they say a lot of the pyramid structures, but certainly the pyramids and the Giza Plateau are aligned with Orion's belt. There are some who even say that our evolution on Earth is being guided from that star system that is from Orion's belt, and that there is has been all along many of the ascended masters or some of the ancient beings such as the Anunnaki and that sort of discussion of beings that are probably related to humans but are not necessarily fully human, that a lot of the myths that come down from the Ice Age period refer to Orion's belt. And so it's interesting to me that there's all this energy around children and a struggle around children that's occurring there in the constellation that's right next to Orion's belt and that spiritual evolutionary center for humanity. And so I do see a lot of potential for emotions bubbling up and becoming quite angry because there's a real desire. And one of the other meanings of the 5th house in some ways is freedom. And so there's going to be, I think, a real power struggle around specifically the fate of children and how children are moving forward in the world during this crisis that's going to really come to the fore this year. You know, a lot of parents, I'm a parent myself, are getting really sick of this children being at home, and then the children going back to school, the conditions at the school, they're putting up plastic barriers all around, all kinds of nonsense and protocols that are just really not helpful to children in their psychological development. There's also the issue of masking causing real issues, especially with very young children, because they gain a huge amount of their wiring psychologically by interacting with people's faces and seeing expressions on faces. So right now there's a lot of babies in strollers, and up comes a person and goes, oh, blah, 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 blah. And they've done experiments where the mother has a completely plain face and doesn't react to the baby, and that disturbs the baby, and they start to disconnect and have psychological problems in real time. It's called the still face experiment. And so these are some of the issues that I think are going to be really triggered about it, by this particular cluster of energies that are coming through here in the 5th house. And then we have K2 in the 11th house. And so that could be some dissolving of friendships continuing to occur, really going to the heart of what creates and sustains friendships. And it's really deep too, because it's in the sign of Scorpio. So really going to the depth of your connection around friendships, and allowing the energies of Scorpio, which would be Pluto in the West, but it's still Mars in the Vedic system, but it still has that energy of transformation. If you're not being transformed positively by your friendships, they're going to dissolve in very strange ways, and you're just going to grow and fall apart. And so, yeah, I'd like to then hear your thoughts on what I had to say, and maybe we can move towards wrapping up here, since we're coming to the end of the hour. I'm sad to say that, but it's flown by. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, these are the kinds of talks go on forever. These kinds of talks, I think, with the energy, it flies by for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question for you, if it's okay, about
Yeah.
the lunar mansions.
Yeah.
So how are mansions the same or different than houses?
So there's 28 of them. 27, and they sometimes call it a 28. So each sign is approximately divided into about 2.5 lunar mansions, and they cross over on the signs. And each one has like a real depth of occult meaning. Unfortunately, I had been working off the Arizona Miami chart, and so I had a little piece I was going to say about that I thought was strange and interesting giving that, but I would have to I know a little bit about Rohini, but I don't want to off the cuff shoot and misfire on that. But the lunar mansions are, some say it was an entirely different system that kind of like eventually the masters around it died off or whatever, and it wasn't really brought forward. I have a book by Prash Trivedi, who's one of my favorite Vedic astrologers, called the Book of Nakshatras. And he actually believes that this was an entire other astrological system that we lost someplace over time, and that it's still used as part of Vedic astrology, but he believes that actually it was originally its own system. And it really does inform, it really does inform how you look at someone's moon sign in particular, because I have Ashvini, which is actually the first sign, and it's, among other things, healing hands. And I'm a Reiki master, and so I was kind of shocked, because I was a Reiki master before I found out about that nakshatra Ashvini, which is the first, means, among other things, having healing hands and being a healer. And so it's really quite interesting, and it's quite in depth, and they have some really amazing, especially esoteric meanings behind a lot of these signs. And like I said, I was going to talk about the sign actually after Rohini was what I had my prepared notes on, and then come to find out there's a Miami, Arizona I misclicked on. So first show rough patches, what can I say? But I have super enjoyed our conversation today, Adam, and I know you need to go shortly. You're a busy man. I would love for you to pitch your book again and tell us where they can find your website, your social media. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And I still want to get into that last point you wanted to make about shadow work. So
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Actually, let's do that first. So
okay.
I was just going to say, and thank you so much, Adam, for that cue there. I really feel that right now, there's a lot of political and financial things that are occurring that are really hemming people, and it's that Saturn energy, right? People are really feeling hemmed in. People are really being blocked. It's very authoritarian. It's very top down. And so a lot of people, I think, are feeling helpless because they would be right to surmise that, wow, the Davos folks really seem to have their hands on the levers of power in the external world. And what I would say is, while that's true, the real opportunity to change this world and the forces behind that Davos group understand this very well, that they work at the level of the archetypal realm, the realm that in Kabbalah and various other, there's a number of different systems that have this concept of there's sort of a monad, there's God, the unified, indivisible being, and then there's emanations that come from that. And they move down through a series of increasingly dense vibrational levels until eventually they reach us here in the material world. I don't even like to call it the 3D world because, there's a lot of talk about 3D, 4D, 5D. And I think that has that value. And so rather than confuse people, I'll just say the material world. And that one of the layers it goes through, that's just a layer or two above us, is the realm of the archetypes. And so this is used very often in like Hollywood movies and various media things to prime and manipulate people's minds in order to create, to grease the skids for what then happens in the physical realm. And people think that the physical realm happens and then it influences people's minds and their imagination and so forth. And then actually that level of the archetype and the deep subconscious, the Jungian world of the archetype also works here. That is really where things come into existence in the world, because people want to say, oh no, things exist. And then we think about them, but that's not quite true, because we couldn't be having this conversation if someone hadn't conceived in their mind first the idea of Zoom, right? Or any of this technology we're using, or really anything to do with culture, language, anything. It actually does begin at the level of mind. And there's more and more experiments that show that actually the universe is just consciousness, and then somehow the material world comes into existence out of that consciousness. That they're saying the universe is mental in nature. Even mainstream science is increasingly having to acknowledge this. And so if you really want to affect change in the world, you want to be bringing down energies and from that realm of the archetypes. But to even do that, to even get to the place to where you have a close enough channel with your higher self, as you were discussing, it's all about freeing yourself from, as you say, the narcissist system. And instead confronting our shadow, looking at ways in which we are wounded or hurt, or things that irritate us. They often say that which irritates us in others it's triggering something in ourselves that maybe we don't like about ourselves. That's not always true. There's people who are just jerks that nobody likes, and it's nothing to do with you, but it's always worth taking the time to say, wow, I just read that article. What really upset me there? Let's go deeper. And let's really get down to it. And when you get down to the raw emotional energy itself of that wound that you have, that's where the chance for transmutation and healing and that inner alchemy is. And it comes down to directly interfacing with that raw emotion without a story. And then once you heal that raw emotion and start to heal that wound and transmute it, then you have the energy within you to really affect change in the world. And did you have any commentary you wanted to add about
so much of what golden, but I will say this to piggyback off your, that the shadow is basically the narcissist system. It's a wounded part of us that believes it's separate from others and that it's not enough, and all of the different machinations of fear that can come from that place.
Yes.
To the narcissist system. But the core of it is really, the fear and the shadow and the pain that we haven't addressed or even seen in a lot of cases. And then that's where the aggrandizement comes in, right? Because it's trying to cover that up. It's like, oh, no, 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 can't let anybody see that. I got to be the best, you know, most, the purest, whatever. And then that stuff never really gets addressed or healed. And that's where we have spiritual bypassing, which you see a lot of in
Yes.
these days. You know, so it's really important. Being spiritual is being a whole being, a light being and a shadow being, and understanding both of them. And the thing is like once we have that higher vantage point over the shadow, it's no longer above us and sort of pulling the levers, as you said. We can actually have the reins and decide, choose, am I going to express this shadow or not? And sometimes it may actually even be appropriate. There are times when shadow can be helpful, like if we're talking about the beast system, which the narcissist would say, you know, if someone's coming for your life, it might be okay to snap at them and be violent. You know, I'm not saying I'm, you know, encouraging violence, but I'm also not saying I'll ever be violent if someone's coming at you to take your life and you're just like,
Right.
No, that's not an appropriate response in that moment, right? You have to, you know, be a present being and a fully integrated being where you recognize that you have both sides. And that's where the real power comes in, because otherwise it's like we're being pushed around. This way, we're the ones pushing the pieces around.
And one last thing I want to say on that point, and then I want to let you plug your website and your book again. And beautiful, and like I would love to talk to you for the next 2 hours if I could, to be honest. And I'll definitely have you back. Is that you mentioned how it's sort of like it's pulling the levers when you don't think about it. When you're not in touch with this unconscious pain, it's really pulling the levers, and that's your own ego pulling the levers. And the people who know how to trigger you and how to get you to respond, they know then how to manipulate you. And what they do is they hijack your subconscious in order to put their magic, with a K, MAGIC, as in actual activated practical magic, to manipulate reality itself. They use your unconscious minds as a vehicle to project into the world their dark designs. But what I will say is that every person who is awake and is doing their inner work is worth 10, 20, 50, 100 people who are unconsciously being guided by these other people. Because while they are giving consent on a certain sense, and you'll notice the narcissist system always wants to create consent. They manufacture it. They trick people. But consent is a key part of the system. And the reason is that they can't get anything to work without tacit, at least, consent. But that tacit consent, that unconscious energy, it's nowhere near as powerful as someone who's actually doing the work, who's actually confronting it. And that's why even one person who is awake and doing the hard work in the journey, they can counteract and neutralize 100 people who are just kind of zombie ambulating and helping the Davos set achieve their agenda. And so it really is the 100th monkey thing. We don't need everybody on earth to wake up for things to change radically. We actually need just a pretty small percentage of people, maybe one person for every 10 or one person for every 20. So 5 or 10% would be enough if 5 or 10% of people are not getting politically active per se, but getting spiritually active, doing the work. And that's what's going to change things. And that's what's going to create a group of people who are immune to this fear, control, narcissism. And it really is the antidote.
Expertly.
Yeah,
expertly stated. And the shadow work is the antidote to that. It's also, you know, what you said about the manufacturing of consent. That is what narcissists do. That's how they manipulate people.
Yes.
And that's one of the modus narcissism, right? Is manipulation, emotional manipulation, mental manipulation. So it really is happening hologram. You know, we can start to make those connections. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. It's really powerful. There's so much, when we're in alignment, we're powerful so much beyond what these little, you know, crazy people are doing. But yeah, to that, I also forgot, I want to mention, I'm offering a free masterclass on healing from narcissistic abuse and reclaiming your self-expression and soul purpose through embodiment and astrology. So that's next Monday evening, Eastern Standard Time at 7:30 p.m. Wow. So feel free to send me an email if you want to sign up for that. It is a free course for a limited time. It won't be free forever. So, and you can find me on my website, rawlifeyoga.com. It's RAW, like raw food. And email me at info@rawlifeyoga.com. And you can find me on Facebook at Adam Astro Yogi Sanchez. And so those are, all of the things. I do have a BitChute channel under Raw Life Yoga as well. If you want to start to take a peek in there, this will be going on there actually. So
fantastic.
Yeah. And thank you so much for hosting this interview. You ask really great questions. You bring poignant topics to the table. I think it's really relevant and even brilliant, if I may say so myself. I don't just want to sound like a fanboy. But,
well, thank you, Adam. That's huge coming from you, brother. Appreciate it.
I mean, my Jupiter energy, this is your Jupiter energy. Just said, Nama Sagittarius stay.
Yeah. And so my website is www.whitelotusoflight.com. And I'm going to soon fold in all the different things I do under that. And part of that is going to be, I'm going to have a regular interview and occasional roundtable show as part of this. And we'll be talking about astrology. We'll have artists, authors. There's some people who are in various different scientific groups that I'm going to be interested in. There's a man in Australia that I would love to get on the show who talks about the electrical universe, which is just a very different way of looking at things. And he actually has a physics related explanation for this kind of connection between us and Orion, or actually us and the entirety of the universe, in a way that's very different from Einsteinian physics. And so I'm hoping to get all sorts of different people with various different perspectives on here, just the full range of kind of whatever the heck I want to have on here. Some upcoming guests I have are Rebecca Larson Augustine, and she has written this amazing book. And I had it nearby, but I don't have it right at the moment, but she's a great author. I'm going to have Juliana Carrera, who is a quantum past life. I forget the exact name of the technique, but she uses a technique to regress you. I had it done. It's amazing. I'm going to have Timothy Hogan, who's a grandmaster of a Templar organization, was grandmaster of a French Templar knighthood that extends back into, the original Templar order. And so there's a number of different guests coming up. And I want to thank you, Adam. I wanted you first and foremost because you really helped spark me, brother. You were a catalyst for me on this huge shift that I will even tell you more later off camera. And so that's why I wanted to have Adam first, because he came out of nowhere. Like, I wonder if we have some kind of Uranus connection, because you were like a bolt of blue out of nowhere, suddenly just really shaking things up in the best way possible. So thank you so much, Adam. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. I'd like to look forward to having you again. And are we doing that roundtable next week?
Yes, tentatively. We have to get all the people, because, when you have more sort of thing. Right. So tentatively for next.
And I will have. Oh, sorry.
Before my workshop, the class, the master class.
Okay. And then we'll probably go up sometime next week, and there'll be links to Adam's website below, and any of the other relevant stuff we talked about today, such as Adam's presentation at the Redream of the World in the Age of Aquarius retreat, my presentation there. And so we should have all the links for all the goodies down below. So thank you so much, Adam, and namaste, brother, and have a blessed day. Thank you. And have a blessed day, everyone watching this.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Bless you.
Thanks.